Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Sam Marshall, how are you doing this afternoon?
Hi there, Ted. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. I guess it's your afternoon. It's my morning with you being in the UK, correct?
Yeah, we're heading into the end of Friday, so as soon as this is done, I'm out of here. It's sunshine, so we've got to make the most of it. Yeah.
All right. So I'm holding you up from your weekend. We'll try and not take too much of your time here.
Don't plan that thought in everybody's head, Ted. It'll be long enough already.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah,
good
it's
point.
Monday morning. We've got a big week of work ahead of us. Let's knuckle down.
Well, I'm actually really excited about this conversation. Before you and I started the podcast, I had mentioned that, I've done close to 36 of these podcasts, and we're an intranet company, and we've never really talked about intranets.
Mm-hmm.
We have kind of tangentially, but we've never really made it a focus. And so I was really excited to get you on the podcast, given your depth. I mean, I consider myself expert level on intranets, but I can't hold a candle to your knowledge on the subject. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. Well,
I think if you like to say I can talk forever on intranets, and that's probably true. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and let's get you introduced here for the folks that don't know you. And, our audience is primarily knowledge management and innovation professionals in the legal industry. So those who've really dove deep into the intranet world probably have heard of you in Clearbox, but many haven't. So, you've been working with intranets for, I think, over 25 years, which intranets
way to make me feel old, but it's true. Yeah.
And I mean, intranets only existed a few years before that. The earliest example I can find, there was a product in the mid 90s that I forget the name of now. That was kind of the big intranet. This was pre-SharePoint. So this would have been like...
I mean, in the UK, there was OrchidSoft who launched their product in 1996. So, they were early web, let alone intranet.
I'll find the name of the product. I'm not sure if it was OrchidSoft or not. I don't think it was. It had a very generic name. But I remember, I'm a longtime technical guy. I used to work for Microsoft actually in the late 90s, early 2000s on the SQL side. And so I've been following technology for a long time. But 25 years in with intranets. You were at Unilever on their intranet team. Now you run Clearbox and been there for 17 years. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about, just take a minute or two and tell us about your background and experience with this topic.
Yeah. So again, I'm Sam Marshall. I'm the owner of a company called Clearbox Consulting. We're based in the UK, but we serve clients across Europe and in North America as well. And my background actually was psychology and then artificial intelligence way, way too early. I'm like the guy who bought a pizza for 10,000 Bitcoin and completely mistimed it. But it's great to see AI coming back now. And most of my life, I've worked in AI and then knowledge management, and then I found my way into intranets and now digital workplace is what I tend to talk about. But within that, of course, the intranets falls into it. And as you mentioned, I cut my teeth being the global intranet manager for Unilever. I was the first global intranet manager, and my task was to converge everybody onto one platform. We think we had about 5,000 separate intranets, and it was symptomatic of the problem. We didn't know how many intranets we had because they just kind of sprung up like weeds all over the place, and that was an exercise in politics as much as it was in technology. And if you work in the digital workplace world, I'm sure you'll recognize that pattern has been the thing that's carried me through ever since. Having done that in Unilever, I liked the space, and I thought it would be good to see how it's done in other industries and help them in their own journeys. So for the last 17 years, I've been running Clearbox, and that's the kind of thing that we do.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about Clearbox a little bit. That's how you and I got connected. I have been a reader of you guys do reports, and you're almost kind of, it feels like, I don't know if this is a accurate characterization, but kind of the Gartner of the intranet world.
I'd happily take that. Thank you. Yeah,
Sure.
I think
Yeah. I
Gartner would say
mean,
they're the Gartner of the internet world, but we are niche specialists.
right. So, well, tell us about Clearbox and what you folks do there.
Yeah, so we basically have two strands, and one is the report that you mentioned. So we call it the Internet and Employee Experience Report, and every year we do a very in-depth review of the leading platforms in this space. So some of them are traditional internet, some of them are coming at it more from like employee services point of view, and some of it come more from a frontline worker and mobile app point of view first. But there's a lot of overlap in this area. And we put them through a rigorous set of tests. So we have 8 scenarios, which are use cases that we see commonly in the clients that we work with. And rather than counting features, which is what Forrester and Gartner tend to do, we say, well, here's a business problem. You tell us how your product would solve that problem. And if one company says, yeah, we use a whole host of fancy AI to do that, and another company says, well, we do it in this very systematic and structured way, we're all good. Because normally, from a business point of view, it's solving the problem that really matters, not does it have technology A or technology B. And we're proudly independent in doing this, and that's a real watchword for us. So we are not resellers of any technology. We are not Microsoft partners. When we work with clients, we don't get any referral fees, and we can hand on heart say, when we advise clients, when we write the report, we have no incentive to recommend something other than whether it's the right thing for the client that we're thinking of, the use cases that we're looking at. The report comes out every year. We started in 2016, and we're focused on the add-ons to SharePoint world. And our first report had 6 products in it. At its peak, it had over 54 products in it. And then we saw a lot of consolidation on the Microsoft side, as in things that sit on top of SharePoint, but a growth in what we call the independent intranet. So some of your listeners might know products like Interact and Unily and Staffbase and Lumaps, which are intranets in their own right, which will play nicely with the Microsoft stack, but don't require it to operate. The other half of what Clearbox does is strategy consulting. So a lot of the time when clients come to us, they're saying we're looking at our digital workplace, or we're looking at our intranet technology, and there's been some trigger for why they want to rethink it. And that could be end of life for the licenses, but it might be they've just gone through a big merger and acquisition, and they're saying, well, we need to really use our digital front door to reflect the big changes that are going on in the organization. Or it might just be that they got a new CEO who says, I come from a company that had a great intranet, and we're just not cutting it in this new company, and I'm going to sponsor getting that right and getting the right things in place for it. So with that kind of work, we do a lot of discovery. We would work with stakeholders and do interviews to say, well, as an organization, what's really important to you? Put the intranet conversation to one side, but what are you trying to achieve as an organization? And then it's on us to help think through what role the intranet could have to contribute to that. And we'll do all employee surveys and probably focus groups and try and get under the skin of what it's like to work inside the organization, what some of the pain points are, but also what is a good cultural match, for example, to how the company likes to operate.
And this is a question that I have been diving deep on, and I have my thoughts on this, but I'm curious to yours. What is the difference between an intranet and a digital workplace solution?
Yeah, this comes up an awful lot, and it might surprise you to say that when people say to me, how do we make our intranet essential? My response is, maybe it shouldn't be essential. Maybe it's okay that your intranet plays a minor role. But if you look across your entire digital workplace, all the tools and systems that you provide your employees to get the job done, it's really important that they have the right tools to do that. The essential thing is that you meet their need. I would say, if you look back 10 years ago, when people talked about the aspirations for the intranet, it was this kind of like what you might call the big intranet. It was trying to be the whole digital workplace. And they would try and do all the collaboration on it. It would try and make it the place for the corporate voice, but also like the social network as well, where employees would talk to each other. It would have all the reference documentation, and it might even have embedded processes and transactions, or it might at least link off to other transactional systems. But I would say these days, the intranet has shrunk a little bit in terms of its footprint, and it's become much more the voice of authority, like that high quality reference system within the organizational domain, which is for employee communications. That includes two-way communications and engagement, and the place where you get your high trust information about what it means to work there. So that might be things like how do we operate, but also what are our templates and what are our processes, and then the launch pad to get into other systems that you need throughout your work. But Microsoft 365, particularly Teams, has really helped redefine the boundaries. And in particular, what I've noticed is people don't say the intranet's a place you go to collaborate anymore, not very often anyway, or not successfully, because we recognize now we have a place for meetings and documents and work-oriented conversations, which have a better home than trying to do it all through a fairly HTML-like interface.
So, yeah, I have a slightly different angle on this. So I think Teams specifically has blurred the lines between intranet and digital workplace. And I think it's going to continue to do so. And, there are features in Teams, for example, if you're an Edge user, which I have avoided Microsoft browsers like the plague for ever, until recently, when they switched to the Chromium HTML engine, and now I use it, and I'm finding some interesting capabilities. So, for example, if you click a link in Teams that opens in Edge, the chat, if you do this from a chat, it will frame that chat into the right margin of the browser, so you can engage with the content and type real time regarding it. That feels very much like kind of a blurred line. I think when I think digital workplace, I think like employee experience platforms, which I actually saw that term on your site. You probably have some additional insight about that, but it's not. Yeah. It's not an ERP solution, right? It is a jumping off point. It is a consolidation, a way in which employees navigate to the resources they need to do their jobs. When I think in a very highly integrative way, for example, enterprise search, which is a very key capability in terms of finding resources, obviously. Enterprise search, we weave seamlessly into our product, which, we say intranet because that's what the market understands. They understand that terminology, but we are really a digital workplace solution. When I think intranet, I think policies, procedures, company mission, vision, procedures, training, calendar of events, all the things that you talked about, kind of those high quality communications that don't change super frequently. And it's not, I don't think of an intranet as a productivity platform. Digital workplace, I do. And, we do some things at InfoDash, for example. Our special sauce really has nothing to do with intranets. Our special sauce is our ability to integrate with all the back office systems that law firms use. And we create a presentation layer for them to drag and drop from any, sometimes as many as 8 or 10 data sources into a single pane of glass, into one UI. And I think of that very much from a productivity standpoint, and that really falls under the digital workplace definition in my mind anyway. Do you agree with that? Or
I think we're agreeing in the sense that although digital workplace isn't such a widely adopted term, I just find it so much more useful when you talk about that bigger picture rather than getting hung up on, is this intranet or is this not intranet? Because every organization can slice it in different ways. And the classic one they always used to come across was like the employee directory. And you go to some internet miner and say, well, this is our killer app. Everybody logs into Source or One Team or whatever it's called, to find someone's name or contact details. And then you go to another organization and say, oh gosh, no, we do all that through Workday, or we do all that through Outlook. And this comes back to my point. We shouldn't care. So long as it solves a problem, then let's not get hung up on it must be in the intranet or not be in the intranet. Let's just ask, does it fulfill the employee's needs? Maybe I can just share a visual for those who can see visuals, and then I'll paint a picture with the words for those just on audio. So what I just popped up is what we call our digital workplace framework. And this is something that we've been evolving and refining for the last 8 years or so at Clearbox. And we've road tested it with, I think, 140 organizations now. So it's not the only way to portray the digital workplace, but we do think it's pretty comprehensive and robust from all that real world experience. And in the middle of the picture is like a model town plan. And we use the metaphor for town planning because we think digital workplaces are similar in the sense that you're not normally working from a green field. You normally have, for example, you mentioned ERP before, like HR systems and so on. They're already in place and part of your digital workplace. So when you're planning strategy, the question is, well, what are the gaps and what do we need to fit around? And also, what are the bits of plumbing and so on, the infrastructure, that make it a coherent experience from the employee point of view? And around this diagram, there's 10 boxes. There's 5 blue boxes at the top. And we talk about these as being capabilities or services that the digital workplace delivers to the organization. So not features, but we've got, for example, communication engagement, and that's both formal, so your corporate news, but also two-way communication, which might be, for example, a ask me anything with the leader, or it might be more like a forum for Q&A between experts. We've got collaboration. So as we were saying, often that's teams for formal collaboration, big projects, but it might also be informal collaboration. So things like, hey, I've been talking to a client today. They got this problem. We're a big organization. Can we just crowdsource a solution for this client in the next 24 hours so I can go back to them? And then, of course, you've got real-time collaboration, Teams, Zoom, and all that good stuff. We've got finding and sharing, which, of course, is search, but it's also a lot more than that. And particularly, I guess, your audience in legal with knowledge managers and so on will know a lot about correctly classifying and structuring knowledge assets that might be precedents or client credentials and all that kind of thing. And we've got business applications, some of which will be employee services, so doing your 401k and booking meeting rooms, and some of it will be dedicated business systems, which might be very industry specific. So in legal sense, often case management tools, but in manufacturing, it might be more like resource planning, and in transport, it will be about schedule planning and that kind of stuff. And then finally, agile working, so being productive anytime, any place. So yes, being mobile friendly, but also thinking, does it support someone who might be working in the field, and what are the conditions under which they're working? It might be that they have gloves on and it's raining, and therefore your interface needs to take all that into account. And then at the bottom of the diagram, there's 5 green boxes. And these are like the management competencies that you need to execute well day to day. So back to the town plan metaphor, you can put up all these buildings, you can install a library, you can zone a park and say, this is for recreation. But then day to day, someone's got to cut the grass, someone's got to look after the library, someone's got to sweep the streets and police the districts and all that kind of thing. And this is often where we see digital workplaces fall apart, and I think we're going to come on to talk about that a bit more, Ted, but people build the building, they launch it, and they say, great, job done, and off they go, and you come back a year later and it's started to decay. So in the green boxes, we've got clarity on strategy, we've got good, clear governance, resources for operations, think about adoption, so is it easy to use, is it learnable, having a high quality and accessible user experience, and having robust and scalable technology. So when we do a digital workplace strategy, it's about looking across all 10 of these dimensions and gathering data in terms of the current state of play and gathering insights into the future destination of the organization, saying, well, where is the organization trying to evolve? And in what ways do these 10 dimensions need to adapt to respond to that evolution? Coming back to where does an intranet fit then? We literally sometimes just color in the boxes. We say, okay, for organization A, your intranet is 90% communicate and engage and 10% find and share. For organization B, it's 20% communicate and engage, it's 10% collaboration, it's 50% finding and sharing, and it's maybe 20% business applications. It all needs to be agile and mobile friendly. It's, if you're old enough to remember graphic equalizers, it's about doing your different mix to get the output that you need.
Interesting. Yeah, this is an interesting and useful metaphor. And I think here you've blurred the lines as well between intranet and digital workplace. There's plenty of both. And, I don't know how important really the distinction is. I think that, for us, we use the term intranet only because that's what the market knows. And if we were to, optimize our messaging around digital workplace, I think it would be less effective, because people just aren't familiar enough with that term. But, this is a good segue into kind of the one topic that I wanted to touch on with you, which is industry specific versus industry agnostic. So we are super niche. We have 100% of our customers are law firms, not corporate legal, not anything outside of the legal realm, just law firms. And things are likely to stay that way. You can never say never, but there's enough of a market out there to keep us busy for quite a long time. And agnostic players have almost zero market share in the AmLaw world. I know of one firm that uses one AmLaw firm. AmLaw is American Lawyer Magazine. They rank the top 200 law firms by revenue. I know of one firm in the AmLaw. They're probably AmLaw 150. There may be others, but there are not many because ILTA, the International Legal Technology Association, does an annual tech survey and asks the question. And there is, you got to be 2%. You got to have at least 2% market share to show up. Otherwise, you get bucketed in other. So maybe there's a few in other, but and I am a believer that we don't worry about our competitors in the industry agnostic space because so much of the value that our solution provides revolves around integration. So we have partnerships with players in the space like analytics providers, with data cubes, and we have point and click. We have a something called a connection manager in InfoDash where you drop down the type of data source you want, where if it's a SQL data source, what tables, and then you can pick the rows and do all that data mapping. We have that for platforms like LexisNexis, several analytics platforms, document management systems, practice management systems, experience management systems, CRMs, all that are all legal specific. So for an industry agnostic player to come in, they're going to have none of those integrations. In fact, there is one industry agnostic player who's in your report. I won't say their name, but they have no integrations and they rely on a third-party search framework. You have to buy both products, and the search platform is their way. They query the search index. So this search platform goes and crawls and indexes. They have the connectors. And then this intranet solution sits on top of that and queries the search index to surface the information. You're buying two products there, and the search framework is very heavy. It's good, but it's sometimes like killing a fly with a sledgehammer. So yeah, it's really just us and one other player in the legal space that really has seemed to lose focus. So our biggest competitor is really firms that are custom deving. And yeah, it is. It's super interesting. And, anybody who really understands custom software development knows how hard it is. And law firms are at an even bigger disadvantage because that's not where the rock star, I don't mean this in a critical way, but there are plenty of tech rock stars in legal, but they fell there. None of them came and said, you know what, I'm coming out and get my CS degree. I want to go work at a law firm. That just doesn't happen. So what is your take on, I don't know of a lot of players like us because we're just in our little bubble. Are there a lot of players like InfoDash, but in other industries that say we only do intranets for financial services or accounting? Does that exist?
Not so totally. There are certainly vendors in our report which have got very strong credentials in certain industries. I think particularly like education. And there are some that work with like local government, local councils. And I think that's initially a happy circumstance for them. You do a couple of good ones and then they all meet at one of their industry conferences and spread the word, and then they get a few more, and you can easily snowball it from there once you get a good reputation within a particular sector. But I've worked with several legal firms doing digital workplace strategies, and legal is quite distinct in terms of what a legal intranet looks like. Whereas I would say most industries, unless they are particularly cutting edge, and there are industries where they have particular vision and take their intranet in a really interesting and unique direction. But generally, you could take like a financial services intranet and reskin it as a construction company intranet. And you probably wouldn't notice, obviously the content would be different, but in terms of the menu structure and your features and in my chart, the capabilities that it majored on, I don't think it would change massively. Whereas in legal, that focus on knowledge, that professional services aspect, really sends it in a different direction. And when I talk to law firms about what does your intranet do, it has a footprint that's very distinct. It's much more information asset rich. It's much more about retrieval and structuring, and metadata is a huge thing in law firms in a way that you very, very rarely see elsewhere. I think the nearest parallel would be other professional services industries, like, for example, architecture, where, again, you have high value individuals and your production line is all about assembling the knowledge to deliver through these high value individuals.
Yeah, document-centric industries, accounting is another. Yeah, so I don't know if this is unique, but it feels unique. Law firms actually do work on their intranet. So, for example, so InfoDash, we like to say we're DoorDash for your data. So we go out and fetch all the information and allow you to create composite views, the single pane of glass. A good example is a client page. Let's just look at that one for a minute. So if I'm a timekeeper and I want to see a holistic view of my customer, I want to see all of the customer contacts that probably live in CRM. I want to see some analytics, like what is my hours billed over the last 12 months. That comes from an analytics platform. I want to see my engagement letters that's going to come from a document management system. I'm going to want to see my open dockets that's going to come from a docketing system. I'm going to want to see a list of open matters that comes from a practice management system. So, our solution allows a way for firms to pull all that information together rather than going to 7 different places to actually get that holistic view. So I don't know, is it unique? Do other industries work on their intranet like that?
There are some. You actually see it a lot with franchise organizations, where the intranet is almost half extranet, but each franchisee will have their view, which will be a portal where, again, it might pull together sales leads, contracts, brand assets, your whole kind of staffing and recruitment and the HR services. And they will have that dashboard where they can see progress against target, but also it will link off to all the resources that they need to sell the service, or restock the restaurant or whatever the kind of franchise is. And certainly the dashboard you described, you would see in many sales organizations, because again, they often, yes, they'll have Salesforce, but often they'll have 4 or 5 other sources of data where to make a good decision. You want to assemble those together. Same often in health and safety environments where you might have monitoring and then procedures, and then of course you'd want your kind of readout of lost time incidents and checking up on that. But I would say, yeah, that's when I come back to. So is that still an intranet, or are they building applications on an intranet platform or delivering it through an intranet? One of my favorite examples is a Danish architecture and construction company called Kobe. And they built this lovely application for architects going out to inspect sites. So midway, they might be building a massive bridge and so on. And the architects would go out and they would actually like go down on a cable, so on a little harness platform. And halfway down the strut of a bridge, they would get their mobile phone out and take pictures of the concrete and all that kind of thing and make audio notes or write notes. Then when they got back to the office, they would sync the mobile phone application to the desktop version, and it would suck in all their notes and things into a pre-structured Word document that was their template for the write-up. And they saw that as their intranet, and everybody kind of loved the intranet because it did this, and it saved them a huge amount of time and was very much oriented around their specific work processes. But I would say, well, no, that's a very, very neat application that it built on top. But it comes back to, it's all digital workplace, so it's all good, and I salute them for doing it. But Ted, I mean, I want to turn on its head a little bit, because until I heard about InfoDash, I was somewhat baffled that there weren't legal-specific intranet vendors out there, because, per what I was saying earlier, legal has a very specific take on what an intranet should be. So it seemed to me obvious that all the law firms basically work in the same way, and your audience will probably shoot me for that, but they they have much more in common with each other than they have in common with other industries. So that's why a generic platform isn't a good match for them. But also, if you think about in a sales environment, everybody tries to put everything into Salesforce because they see that as their home. And in a health environment, everybody tries to convert everything into the health systems because that's their home. So why isn't there something like iManage basically doing what an intranet does in the legal world? Why are the big legal vendors not doing that integration anyway?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there is a little bit of that. So for example, but mainly on the extranet side. So, in the AmLaw document management space is really a duopoly. It's iManage and NetDocuments. And NetDocuments was cloud, born in the cloud. iManage is moving very rapidly in that direction, but NetDocs was there first, and they have a few ways in which they can create a walled garden that you can expose to a client more in an extranet scenario.
Sure. Yeah.
But beyond that, so we did have a competitor in the space who actually we partnered with in the mid 2010s. They got bought by a much bigger company, and there's no innovation going on there. It's kind of just rotting, honestly.
Wow.
So yeah, why are there not more? I don't know that there's really room for multiple players in the space. So our target audience is law firms with 100 attorneys and up. There's only 400 of those law firms in the world. 400. So,
Really? Okay.
Well, that's based on there very well could be more, but where I got that number from is the ILTA organization that I mentioned. They have a roster of all of their law firms and law firms' employees, and they have attorney counts in there. Most of the big law firms are members. They're a little underrepresented in the small law space, but like all AmLaw firms are ILTA members. So, so that's where that number comes from. There very well could be more, but that's the best data source that I have on it. So even if it's 500, it's probably not more than that. How many players can you really have in the space? I don't know that there's room. our strategy is, in addition to the intranet side, we kind of started there first. So we were consultants and used to build these custom solutions, and then partnered with a product company in the space, wasn't impressed with what they were doing. So we decided to build our own. And then we did it so many times. It's like, all right, let's productize this. So we shut the consulting organization down, rebranded and launched InfoDash in January of 22. So 2.5 years ago. But we started with intranets because right now there's a catalyst. All these big law firms are moving to Microsoft 365 in earnest. Something that most industries did 5, 6, 7 years ago, at least. Law firms are finally getting across the goal line on that. And the first thing that moves is messaging. Almost always. I've never actually heard of a M365 migration that didn't take that sequence. And then secondarily, things like SharePoint workloads, workflow, that sort of stuff comes. And now that is starting to happen. So we're really busy because all these firms have to reimagine their intranet because what they had on-prem won't work in the cloud, and it's probably dated. But we're focusing on going extranet. We have an extranet platform that's launching soon. We'll have something that we can demo in about 3 weeks at the ILTACON conference. But my thinking is, why have a separate? So the incumbent on the extranet side, there's one player who has probably 80% of the market share, a company called HiQ, owned by Thomson Reuters, and they've largely gone unchallenged forever. And we had the player in the intranet side that was pretty dominant, and then HiQ, but nobody ever tried to do both. And the reason is because intranets were on-prem and extranets were in the cloud, like HiQ. Now that intranets are in the cloud, it really makes sense to unify those experiences. So that's kind of where we're heading next.
I mean, the legal sector has been particularly coy about adopting the cloud, hasn't it? It's probably the last area where we do strategy consulting, where you're coming off the cloud. Everyone else is now like second generation cloud product choice. But that trajectory that you described for InfoDash, I mean, it's very much what we saw across the SharePoint Internet in a Box industry in 2016, 2017. There was almost like this Cambrian explosion of service providers, so Microsoft partners, that got the code base, about like 3 or 4 internet add-ons that had taken what was a fairly poor SharePoint Internet experience from Microsoft and built it up in something which was less poor, shall we say, by modern standards. And then they went, let's productize this. And they had a few good years, but the market was really saturated. And much as we like reviewing all these products, we said, look, there's got to be some consolidation here because there isn't really a great deal of differentiation. The differentiation is geographic. So, yeah, you might have one Midwest player who's got their client base of maybe 300 customers and they're doing fine there, but there would be no reason to go with that Midwest vendor if you're based in Europe. And I think that's a legacy of on-prem. When you had to go to the servers to install it, and there's an advantage to being to working with a local supplier, you'd want to do that. Now with cloud, the install is often quite trivial, sometimes even a matter of hours, and it's much more about the customization and the service side, again, helping the client through the journey of the launch. So on the generic kind of internet front, I think what we're seeing is Microsoft has closed a lot of the feature gap that the add-on vendors used to exploit. And a lot of the people who did have a product are going back to saying, yes, but the client still needs services because Microsoft 365, SharePoint Intranet, so it's a big and complex world that can tie themselves in knots. So what they need more is the advice again and maybe a little bit of technical knowledge rather than the code library and the help there. I think what you're getting right with InfoDash is that you're still in a niche where Microsoft is never going to close that functionality gap between what knowledge management and fee earners need compared to what Microsoft will offer as a generic product. So, you should be in Europe as well. I guess that's my conclusion because you're saying there's enough work. I'm sure there is, but then it's the same pattern in Europe that there are lots of law firms that would be big enough, that have a similar set of demands, that need something which they want that Microsoft standard. They've decided that's going to be part of their ecosystem, but they're bespoking to fill the gap, or they're doing an awful lot on email to fill the gap when they shouldn't be.
Yeah. So we have not focused on that. We have been so busy. I literally can't hire people fast enough in the US right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that market is on our radar. And I agree with you. I think there's a ton of opportunity over there. We have several AmLaw 50 clients who have a UK presence and international presence, but we have not really, I don't know that we have one client who's actually headquartered outside of the US. We have several Canada actually, but not UK. What about intranet and extranet, the terminology? Like when you were describing the franchisee model, it doesn't even to me make sense. I don't know if you agree with this, but like those terms they described the network topology of where the solution was hosted, right? It was like intranet is behind your firewall, extranet is in a DMZ outside your firewall. There is everything's in the cloud now. So you could use those terms as a proxy for people inside your organization versus out. But then you run into blurry lines like franchisees and franchisors. Is that an extranet? Like, so are those terms dated? Do they still make sense?
Oh, they are dated, but they're the ones that people recognize. And every time you and I try and move on and talk about digital workplaces, you find people are still Googling intranet and extranet. So you got to meet people where they're starting their journey and take them along a little bit. But you can't just leapfrog them and hope somehow they're going to see the light and Google the right terminology for you. I mean, intranet, as you say, it's like a cousin of Ethernet. We don't talk about Ethernets in the same way we talk about extranet. And the other way in which boundaries are being blurred are things like outsourcing. So it's quite common now that you outsource your whole HR function, but they still see the intranet. They often even are major users of the intranet, major suppliers of information and content for an intranet for the employees, and often with contractors as well. And now with Teams, you can federate across your teams to a partner who might be on an entirely different domain. It's not great, but it's getting there, and one day I'm sure it will work very well. And that's just modern business, isn't it? To have these much more permeable boundaries.
Yeah, that's a great point about partners and those lines being blurry. So we are actually putting our chips on the table with Teams, and what you alluded to is B2B sharing, as Microsoft calls it, and the ability to share channels. I'm a believer, and everybody at InfoDash is a believer. You may be too. You can chime in on it, that Teams shared channels is going to provide the most frictionless way to engage with an external party, right? Like let's use a law firm example. You're Coca-Cola, I'm ABC law firm. You open a labor and employment matter with me, and we intake documents. We put them in we'll sync them with a Teams shared channel. Notifications pop up. No tenant switching show up coalesced with all the notifications that you receive every day. There's no separate user interface. There's no separate URL. There's no separate set of credentials. We believe that is going to be the way that law firms collaborate with their clients, and we're putting our money where our mouth is on that. And Teams is going to play a big part in our.
I think that's going to be a long journey culturally, Ted. And do you remember Delve? And you would see everyone else's documents, and people freaked out a little bit because their mental model wasn't up to speed about what is this thing showing me, and the notion of asset level access controls wasn't part of their mindset. So they just thought, this whole folder of stuff is open up to everybody, and we need to clamp it down. I think channels within a team, people now are fairly comfortable with the notion that this team is either just for us inside ABC law firm, or somewhere else we've got the safe sharing space with the client. But to break that down and say at the channel level, there are access controls, it's great. You and I get it, and I absolutely see the potential. And once people get it, I think they'll really appreciate the seamlessness of it. But I do think it will be quite a long journey of getting people comfortable with that possibility.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to set up at the moment. There's a article that's got, I think, 13 steps that each IT department has to take in order to enable B2B sharing. And it involves leaps of faith. Like, I have to accept your and whatever your access control choices are in your tenant, I have to agree to accept those. So it's it's a little harder than it should be today, but it'll get better. I know we only got a few minutes left, and I really wanted to touch on this subject of build versus buy, because as I mentioned, that's kind of our main competition in the space, are just firms that have it in their head that it makes sense to build. I feel like if I can get in front of a customer before they make big commitments in that direction, I can explain why it makes sense to not do that. You know, things like just the product innovation. You know, we are constantly investing in R&D in the product and making it better, and that's something they don't have to do. But also things like listening to the updates. You know, we know when updates are coming before they happen in SharePoint Online, and sometimes we get caught by surprise. I'm not going to lie, but for the most part, we can prepare. For a firm to have those teams internally do that and also innovate the product as if there's dozens of other firms contributing ideas, just doesn't seem to make sense. But I don't know. What is your take on the build versus buy paradigm, and how do you see clients make those sorts of decisions?
Yeah, I mean, build is definitely in decline, but there's a niche case for it, which is if you genuinely have a different way of doing business, that may well be your USP. And if you buy, it's going to force you into a way of doing business in the same way as everybody else. And that's, classic with like SAP in the way in which you do your financial systems. It's, you've got to do it the German way, or you're going to be going against the grain with SAP every single day. And most companies capitulate because they say, well, the way in which we run our finances is not a key differentiator. But if you're, for example, a dynamic law firm and you're saying, well, we're really going to shake the mold here and do things differently, there might be a case for building. And we have worked with other very dynamic organizations, like we worked with a biotech company that was kind of startup. It had 1,000 employees, but it was kind of a startup type vibe going on. And they just had a team of good developers, and they were taking their intranet products in all kinds of really interesting places because they could say, we got an idea. Can we, do like an MVP take on this and try it out? And like, yeah, that's good. So we're going to add this and add this, and it would evolve into something which was uniquely them. But on the whole, one of the reasons why I try to deter clients from doing build is they massively underestimate the cost of specifying what they want. It is a huge amount of work just to say each screen's got to look like this, and this is how one screen flows to the other, and these are all the exception cases. That sort of nitty-gritty stuff we don't really get exposed to in software development on the scale that we used to do 20 years ago. But if you build, you're absolutely going back to doing all that and doing all the testing on it and maintaining all the code. And if you're talking about long-term cost of ownership, I think it's very hard to justify unless you know why you're going to get some unique benefit from it that you can't buy off the shelf. About 5 years ago, when we were looking at SharePoint versus add-on products, the article I wrote about it was build, buy, or wait. And build was like low down, buy was pretty high up. But wait was always a contender as well. A lot of companies said, all right, you can't do it now, but we see Microsoft roadmap. We just think Microsoft has got enough momentum behind it that in a couple of years' time, it will be close enough to what we need that we'll save a whole ton of money just by having a little patience there.
Yeah. I would argue that even if you have the engineering capacity internally to deploy on a project like that. To your point, I would only do that if I could create competitive advantage by doing so. Creating an intranet, especially when you've got players like us that are so zeroed in on what law firms need, it's like, you're not going to have to make big compromises like you would, with a generic platform that is not really dialed into your specific industry. So we've actually tried to productize. So we have like a maturity model where we have a stage 1 through 4, and like stage 1 are the basics, and we can deliver that for a fixed price. Eventually we'll get to where we can do stage 2 also. We're not there yet. We just launched this like less than a year ago, but we're trying to productize. There's no like the odds of Clearbox coming in and doing a requirements gathering and discovering a use case that hasn't been discovered before, the odds aren't 0, but they're close. I mean, it's just, we've been doing this. We started in 2008 doing this, building custom. So again, there's always, you can never say never, but the odds are low. And when you look at like where you could deploy, especially in the age of AI, it's like you've got valuable, finite engineering capabilities, bandwidth. Deploy that in a way that has some business value, not just because you can.
Yeah. There is a middle ground to put out there. So we work with an architecture firm who they'd got an in-house employee directory, which was very sophisticated. So not only could you find people's details, but you could then say, and do it in ways like, okay, I want someone who's worked on poured concrete on bridges, who's worked in the Far East, and give me a list of all of those. And then you could say, now export this into resumes, which I can then put into a bid for a client, highlighting the things that I've just mentioned. And they came to us and said, well, we don't want to maintain this anymore. Can you find us a product out there that does this? And we looked around and said, well, there are options which are not a million miles away. And they also do some things that you might like. So it would say, you found Jeremy, and here's other 3 people who are like Jeremy who might be a good substitute for this bid. So why don't you talk to that vendor, because you're a very big firm and you'll be an important client to them, and talk to them about working on the roadmap, and maybe you share the cost of development between the additions that you need, and then let that vendor put it into their standard product specification and sell it on.
How did that work out?
They got on very well with them, because they were probably the biggest client of the vendor. That's the thing, and then you have enough sway to influence the roadmap.
Yeah, we have advisory panels. So we get our clients together periodically and listen to ideas and feedback about the product. So we we call it, VOC, voice of customer. That's a Six Sigma terminology. We didn't invent it, but VOC is very important in staying aligned with what the market needs, for sure. Well, Sam, I think I am the only thing between you and enjoying your weekend and maybe a pint. So I could seriously talk about this, with somebody with your knowledge for hours, but I promised not to keep you too long, so I'm gonna keep my word. But how can folks find out more about what you do if they're interested in possibly engaging or seeing your report? How do folks find you?
Sure. So the best place is our website, which is Clearbox, CLEARBOX.co.uk. We're Clearbox with the opposite of black box. That's how to remember it, but it's .co.uk. You can also find us on LinkedIn or at Clearbox on X, formerly known as Twitter. And I love talking intranets. So anybody wants to get in touch and talk to me more about intranets, I'm always happy to have a good chat about it.
Well, there was a whole several topics that we wanted to talk about that we didn't get to. So if you're open to it, I'd love to have you back down the road and continue the conversation.
Yeah, that would be a pleasure. But thank you very much for the invitation, Ted. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. And enjoy your weekend.
You too. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Bye. Take care. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Info-.